As we move on to the Baroque era, I find that the Palace of Versailles really says it all. I've never had the opportunity to go there, and I hope that's something I get to accomplish in my lifetime because everything that I've ever seen about it is absolutely glorious. The Baroque era in music follows along with architecture and art of the same era, and you will see that this happens most of the time in music. We have parallel ideas. Sometimes they might happen at a little different time, but generally speaking, we're going to have a lot of parallel ideas when it comes to art, literature, architecture, and music. In the Renaissance, we see this culmination of balance and symmetry, and nothing is ever out of place, and it's all smooth. And we find that in the Baroque era, this completely is turned on its head. If you look at this picture of the Hall of Mirrors of Versailles, we see that it is incredibly ornate. We have all kinds of frescoes on the ceiling, these really over-the-top chandeliers, all this gold leafing on all of these different pedestals here. So it really is quite ornate, and that is what we will find about the music of this period. We go from smooth, balanced, harmony just right, to still the same emphasis on harmony, but done in a completely different way. Everything here is very large and majestic and grand, and you will find that the music is really over the top. It's really, really ornate. We find that there's a lot of emotion in music because we have the rise of opera in this time. Just to give you an idea of what I mean by grandiose, I want to take a couple more pictures of Versailles. This is an overhead view, and you can see this whole section is simply the palatial grounds, the buildings. It doesn't even include the grounds, and there's over 1,000 rooms in Versailles. This is a picture of the Queen's bedroom, and I thought this was a great way to explain what music is going to be like in the Baroque period. As you can see on the walls, there is really no empty space anywhere. Everything is very florid. We have all kinds of gold leafing, this crazy chandelier. The furniture is very ornate, and the bed is extremely large with plenty of curtains and crazy stuff all around it, ruffles, floral, everywhere. And you'll see that music also is very similar to this. Look how small the door is in comparison to this gigantic room. So we have some big shoes to fill here in the Baroque era. I want to point out one other thing in the realm of art because this really brings home the ideas and music that we're going to be discovering. But if you'll notice, this is a Renaissance version of David as he is contemplating killing Goliath. Although I think in this particular statue, he already has killed Goliath and he's pondering this. I was actually able to see this when I went to Florence, and its beauty is astounding. It is absolute perfection. You would think that this was a human being standing there, even down to his toenails. It is absolutely incredible. But when we move into the Baroque, this is also David. And here he is getting ready to fire that slingshot. And we can see how much more emphasis there is on movement. The other was a static piece where he's really standing in repose. Here we're seeing him at work, and this too is how Baroque music sounds. It is constantly in motion, it's constantly at work, it's identifying emotion, it's stair-stepping in our dynamics from soft to loud. We will see a lot more expressiveness in this particular era. We're going to see a lot of shifts in Baroque music. In the Renaissance, there was a large emphasis on vocal music, a cappella, that was meant for the church. We did see that instrumental piece at the very end of the Renaissance era, but things changed quite a bit here. We're actually moving into the aristocracy. That picture of Louis XIV's Versailles Palace really shows us the importance of the aristocracy at the time. I mean, for him to be able to tax the people and make that much money and spend it in such a lavish way tells us that they are really the ones that are ruling the style of the era. We have a number of changes. Opera comes into existence here. We have the Florentine Camerata, which is it was a group of people that promoted the idea of storytelling through music. So they are really kind of the ones that were the basic starting point for opera. But that was in Florence. We also see the rise of this in England as well. But opera becomes important. We have this idea of equal temperament. This is where we take a piano and we tune it equally so that all of the notes sound in harmony pretty much to one another. This had not happened before this time, and we see J.S. Bach just really run with this idea of equal temperament. Now he can create hundreds and hundreds of different keyboard pieces. Melody continues to be important. We really move out of polyphony and we go to homophony. And then music really, instead of necessarily glorifying God, which it still does if you are writing in a church setting, but now it's really more humanistic as we are delving into the role of the human being and our emotions and our storytelling outside of the church. So this is some of the ways that the Baroque music actually changed from the Renaissance to the Baroque era. One of the other things I really wanted to talk about before we begin our specific chapters is the castrati. This is a man who has had his testicles removed. Yeah, he's been neutered, but this was done for a variety of purposes back in this day. I really feel sorry for these people. It was a very hard life for a castrati because you're stuck in between being a man and being a woman, really through no fault of your own. Most of these people didn't make the decision to do this. It was done because it gave them a shot at incredible success. Unbelievable stardom was bestowed upon the castrati who could do really amazing things with his voice. If you think about it, it's basically a woman's voice with the power of a man. So they were all over the map. They could sing super high and they had all sorts of notes of the spectrum that they could add to their music. So being a virtuoso, being really technically advanced in your art was very important at this time, and castrati filled that role. If there weren't castrati available, women would take on the role of the soprano. So we do get to see women lauded more and more in their performance roles. So this becomes very important, the virtuosity and the fact that women are now able to really kind of do a little bit more in the music world. Chapter 20 really talks about this nun, Chiara Cozzolani, and she was working in a convent in Milan in Italy, and she took her vows at age 18. She was actually from a wealthy family there in Milan, and she went on to write quite a bit of music for public performance by this group of nuns. They were very well known and very well respected in the music community. I'm not going to spend a great deal of time on this chapter. What the publishers and what we really want you to know is that there is a kind of begins to be a rise in the ability of women to do more in the music world, and Cozzolani is a direct recipient of that idea. And we're going to listen to just a little bit of her music under the listening guide here. I'm going to listen to the very end of this because it really juxtaposes old school and new school. We have something called the prima pratica and the seconda pratica. Prima pratica was really the old style, the way that they were doing it in the Renaissance, with this balance and symmetry and not too loud, not too soft, all vocal. And here we see kind of a mixture of that. We've got the choruses. There are two choruses in this number, and then we have the soloists, and the soloists are more florid. If you go back and look at the Palace of Versailles, it's really emulating those ideas. Lots of notes, lots of musical interest. And then we have the period in the doxology where it's also very static, and it sounds very much like the Renaissance. So let's listen to just a tad of this. Okay, so right there we see we went from this very static style to when we get to Anima Mea, Magnificat Dominum, all of a sudden we burst into this new type of style that we're going to be hearing a lot more of in the Baroque period. We're going to move directly on to chapter 21 and talk about Henry Purcell. When we talk about the new style of opera, this was very much like watching a film today. This was how the aristocracy really got out and entertained themselves. So it became a very large-scale idea. You're going to have scenery, costumes, all sorts of acting. It was a very long, drawn-out day when you do this. I guess it probably wasn't drawn out to them, but it was a long day where they would take breaks, they would have dinner, they would play games, they would sing songs amongst themselves, and then you would have these dramas that would come in throughout the day, and you would, so it was a day-long experience when you're experiencing these operas. Aria, very important. This is the tune. This is where you have a reflective moment on the plot line. So the arias are usually the most intense parts of the opera. We have ensemble numbers where you're going to have a chorus, you might have instrumental music. We have something called an overture, which gives us the beginning. It comes at the beginning of the opera, and it usually has in it a lot of the tunes that you're going to hear. Throughout a lot of the melodies, it kind of gives us an overview of the music. Finally, this idea of libretto. A libretto is the actual words to the opera, and a librettist is the person who writes the script or the words of that opera. Now, opera in England actually was one of the most important places for opera at the time. We find that it moves more to the center of Italy, becomes Italy and France, and Germany too. But really, opera in England had its heyday in the Baroque period. And what's nice about English opera is that we can understand it. So that's one of the nicest things about it. It was originally called a masque, but the Puritans thought that that was a really bad idea. So they actually banned that. So they tried to kind of make it into a concert, and this is kind of how we got the overture. This is how we get a lot of the symphony music that's in there, and they began to stage it then as an opera. Here we have Henry Purcell. He is the composer of the music of the opera, and he was English. He only lived to be 36 years old. He had a number of royal appointments there in England, working in Westminster Abbey as the organist, for one thing. There's a couple things we need to know about this opera. One is called ground bass, where we have a repeated phrase in the bass line. This happens to be descending chromatically, and I'm going to show you this here in the next video. But it descends chromatically, and we know in music that if you have a descent, it usually has to do with some sort of sadness, grief, possibly even death. So Purcell is very good at bringing these sounds together to really culminate the feeling of grief and sadness in this opera. Most of these early operas had Greek and Roman storylines. They were considered, I guess, to be elevated storylines from mythology. And in this particular story from the Aeneid, Aeneas leaves his lover, Dido, and he decides to go back to Greece, and by making this decision, Dido decides to kill herself. We see this quite a bit in opera. That's very dramatic and in their emotional states, but she is very obviously very upset and decides that she's going to go ahead and end her life because Aeneas will not stay with her. So this is the setting up of the point where Dido asks for her handmaid, Belinda, to come with her while she contemplates her tragic end. And we'll take this up in the next video.